Burn. I wrote for luck. They sent me you. I sent for juice. You gave me poison. I hold the line. You formed a queue. Try anything hard. Is there anything else you can do? Ladies and gentlemen, we are now floating in Screamacelica. My name's Kevin Graham, and as usual on a Tuesday evening, I'm joined by Russell Boyce. Russell, bit of the happy Mondays there, but this is a happy Tuesday, yes. Isn't it? This is a happy Tuesday, eh?
We are the happy Tuesdays, mate, absolutely. I knew the song straight away. It's Wrote for Luck, it's called, isn't it?
It is Wrote for Luck, yes.
The WFL.
Aye,
fantastic track, that. Brilliant bass line.
The WFL.
Attitude oozing out at that song, Kev.
The WFL was the Oakenfold remix, I think. I think they abbreviated to the Paul Oakenfold remix. Oh, it's a fantastic song. I was listening to the Happy Mondays the other day there, and there's a line in the song that I never got to it. It used to say, you used to tell the truth, but now you're clever. And I'm like, that is perfect summation of politicians, of anybody in power, of anybody that used to have morals and beliefs, and they get to an alleviated place of power. You used to tell the truth, but now you're clever. I just think that Sean Ryder for me is a poet, and you know I quite like.
You've said that before, yeah. No,
I quite like poets. How's things anyway, Russell? How you getting on the day?
I'm very well, mate. I was a last minute substitution on the bulletin earlier on, impromptu appearance. Everyone will be sick of the sight of my face now. I think that's been 3-4 shows in a row now I've been on, so. Look, Paul, just getting back to the nonsense of Screamacelica, Kev. This is more like it for me, mate, you know.
This is nonsense, and anybody that takes this serious needs to really have a look at themselves.
I mean, that football punditry, will leave that to the experts like Charlie Nicholas, for example, you know.
Well, we're going to be mentioning Charlie Nicholas quite a lot on this bulletin. No, it's not a bulletin, it's Screamacelica. That was you mentioning bulletins there, eh?
Aye, sorry, mate.
Daniel MC comes in, look at him with his vase of flower trying to pretend he's got morals. Well, I don't know where you get that from, where flowers and morals come from, but there is a vase of flowers, and they're right flowers, they're not fake. So
it's
there
quite
we go.
Incredible the narratives people come up with these days, Kev.
I love them.
Like actually create like narratives about your life. They don't know you for Adam, and yet they'll create reasons that you're doing things. I mean, there was one today said to me, look at the state of him. He looks like he's woke up on his right-hand side, and I bet there was a kebab on the other side. I find that baffling, and you could come up with that much just by someone talking about football. And I ask you, if you're going to put any of that nonsense up, put your full name. Put your full name up there. And put a picture of yourself, Daniel. That would be nice to see, son.
It's all right, Daniel. We know it's banter, and it's just banter back. We know what it's like in the comments of Screamacelica. It's a bit of a wild twilight zone of anything goes. Of anything goes, really. We're going back to 1991 tonight. The DeLorean's back in 1991 to the old Celtic Park, and to a game where no many people will remember. And I put it up on Twitter last night so people could do their homework and watch the full Scott Sport 25 minutes highlights of this game. And it's really, really good to see the Scott Sport production. And I must admit, I love the graphics. See those like the half football tops with the badges. I think they're cracking. I think they're so cool as anything that they should just bring them back.
So true, mate. And do you know what else I loved? Every player, no matter how long they've been, like, you would think they've just signed for the club because it'll say, you know, Paul McStay signed from Celtic Boys Club. Like, he's been in the first team for like 6 years. You would think it was a brand new signing. Do you know what I mean? Mike Galloway signed from Hearts in '89, 500 grand. I'm like, I love this. This is great, guys. And then, of course, the referee is from Carluke, because that's really important that we know that. You know what I mean?
One of the linesmen was also from Carluke, and the other linesman was from Bathgate. I found that out by reading the match report. That's the information that you need to know, though, Russell.
Absolutely agree with that.
That's the information that Lawrence Connolly absolutely loves, and he reckons that every referee should actually declare where they come from and what their lodge number is. That would be so this is Liam Brady's first season. And after a dodgy start, we're now 6 games unbeaten going into this game. Dundee United are 7 games unbeaten going into this game, and we're only 4 points behind Rangers. What I loved about this is like I remember watching Sports Scene on a Sunday, and I was at this game at the time, and I remember seeing the Sports Scene trucks parked outside the Jungle and going, yes, it's on the telly. We're going to get half an hour highlights. And Mike Galloway and that comes out, and you say it's like Mike Galloway signed for Hearts £500,000. Want to ken what the one, and Willie comes in and just nicks my banter, man. Dave Neary signed 1973.
See, when I was reading that, I was in shock. I kept like going, oh, they've obviously made a mistake. And then they went, 35-year-old David Neary's made his way back into the first team. I was like, wow, 73. That is, that comes up in the highlights.
2 years before I was born, Russell. 2 years before, even I was taken aback with that signed an S form in 1973. That's like
brilliant, though.
It's brilliant. At the start of this game, I mean, obviously we're focusing on Mike Galloway the night Mikey, because Paul went down and visited him a couple of weeks ago, and there's a great interview with him on the channel, and it just brought back memories of me of Mike Galloway at this time, and he was fantastic for Celtic at this time, at this point in his career, and he talks about that in the interview. But you can also tell that he's brilliant, that he's playing well for Celtic at this point, is because the Jungle's singing his name as he's getting his picture taken with Paul McStay, who is making his first appearance of that season in October, that day. So Mike Galloway's getting his photo took with Paul McStay, and the Jungle's singing the Mikey Galloway song, and he turns round and he gives him applaud. He had turned our season around at that point after a dodgy start, and he had grown into the centre half role. I mean, the Celtic team that day was Bonner, McNally, White, O'Neill, Galloway, Gillespie, who, strangely enough, managed to injure himself at half-time, and he was replaced by Peter Grant, Joe Muller, Paul McStay, Tommy Coyne, Charlie Nicholas, and John Collins. Charlie Nicholas was took off in the 82nd minute and replaced by the other sub that day was Tony Cascarino. But we're going to talk about the KLF later on, wasting £1 million, burning £1 million on the Isle of Jura, But we should have just burnt that £1 million that we spent on Tony Cascarino. But saying that, we would never have got Tom Boyd.
Good point.
Very good point. We could actually swap him for Tom Boyd. Again, if you look at that Celtic team, one thing it jumped out at me right away when these teams come out, that Celtic jersey's aged well, I think
it looks all right. It looks all right. It's just, it's not quite tight enough for me, Kev. I like it a wee bit better fitted. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying like the old Kappa jersey's tight, but I think it could just be a wee bit neater fitted. But yeah, it has aged well. You're 100% right. And I think we spoke about this in one of the pods a couple of months back. There's a lot of controversy over this jersey, in particular because it has, of course, the colours red, white and blue on a Celtic Hoops jersey, the only one ever to feature that. So it is a wee bit interesting that would, you know, at the time maybe conflict minds and whether they wanted to buy the shirt or not, because, wait, no, we're not buying a shirt that has red, white and blue on it. But I think you're absolutely right. I think you watch the footage there and you go, it's a nice shirt. That is a nice shirt. And again, see the lineup you just read out there. I've spoke to you about this before. It's so young. Such a young team. Which I think maybe, does that get missed a wee bit when you look back at history of our underperforming Celtic side? There's a lot of youth in there, Kev.
There is a lot of youth. Mark McNally, Derek White, Brian O'Neill. Joe Muller would have just been in his early 20s at that point, I reckon.
21, 22. McStay's a veteran there, and he's only 25, Kev.
He was. again, it's one of these teams when you look at it, there is quality there, and maybe this is just nostalgia playing tricks on me. But when you watch the highlights of this game, we were utterly fantastic during this game. And 4-1 actually flatters Dundee United. There are a couple of comments coming in. Frank Brennan, Gary Gillespie was the James McCarthy of his day when it came to injuries. That's harsh. That is really, really harsh. We stood at number one. The sponsorless one was better. That's true, because they had a sponsorless one, I think, the following season. Or was it the season before? I'm not 100%, but there was a sponsorless one. I like to be flash on the sleeve, the wee black bit. That actually was okay. I mean, as I said, McStay's playing the first game of the season. Another thing it struck me about that was the attendance. 28,845.
I did notice that as well.
That's very, very low for any modern day Celtic fan to actually think about. We only getting, I mean, we usually now only get 28,000 if it's a League Cup tie or something like that, or the board have been Tories and trying to charge us for something that they shouldn't. And that was a normal attendance for Celtic. That was probably actually a big attendance for Celtic at that time. And it's a vast stadium. It was a vast bowl of a stadium. And I was in I called it the Rangers end, and I still call it the Rangers end at that time, because I could still get thrown over the turnstiles, because the turnstiles at the Rangers end at that time hadn't been put full length. So you could still ask somebody. You could still ask somebody to throw you over. And I was wee, so I was great. I just asked somebody and they would chuck me over, and I would get into the game for nothing. But I'm sure many of the old board are going to chase me for my £1.50 gate fee now that I didn't actually pay them when they were disappearing down the London road with bags of cash and Vauxhall Vivas, saying there was only 60,800 there. Game kicks off, Russell. After 10 seconds, Charlie Nicholas has produced a save for Guido van de Kamp, who goes on to have a Craig Gordon game against us in this game. It's unbelievable. 10 seconds in, Nicholas hits a shot and he tips it over the bar.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad you brought out Van de Kamp, because what a game he had.
Definitely.
This is a 4-1 win, and you cannot deny Van de Kamp is the difference between that being 4-1 and potentially 10 is scored by Celtic, because we were all over them from as you say, the opening minute of the game. Charlie Nicholas hits an absolute peller going for the top bins, and see when a game's just sort of in its opening phase like that, what a way to settle yourself into a game if you're Charlie Nicholas by just warming up with a pinger like that. Absolutely brilliant.
This isn't the lean and slim Charlie Nicholas of the 82, 83 fame and national fame. This is the wee stodgy Charlie Nicholas who's stomping about. He's not graceful. He's stomping about the ground. But that season, he scored over 30 goals for Celtic that season, which is utterly baffling. It's not baffling. It's just one of these things, because my mind obviously plays tricks. And you heard the jungle singing his name. And if somebody would have asked me, when Charlie Nicholas returned to Celtic for the second time, was he accepted? I would have went, no, he wasn't. But watching this footage proves completely different. And I think that's down to what he's went on and done in his media career, that he's just sort of completely airbrushed from Celtic history and even some Celtic fans' history. But as this footage proves, on that day, he was a darling of the Celtic support.
Absolutely agree, Kev. I think 100% you're right. It's the media stuff that's completely changed the narrative on Charlie Nicholas, you know what I mean? And see, to be fair, I think at times he has had a pop at Celtic unnecessarily. But also, you need to make your buck somehow, And I think a lot of the time folk forget that. It's maybe not as personal as people think, or aimed at the club as, like, in a way of hatred towards the club that was good to him. He's just be going, the controversy makes me dollars. It's a sad reality of life. I need to still put bread on the table. That's how I do it. And I think if folk could strip all that back, it would make everyone's worlds a wee bit easier, especially with someone like Charlie Nicholas, who you're absolutely right. And I thought his second spell as a flop, if I'm being honest. That was because it was just before I started watching Celtic as a fanatic, basically, as a youngster. He was just before that, Kev. And if you'd asked me how was his second spell at Celtic, I would have probably argued it didn't go very well. And then you watch that game there, he should have scored a hat-trick. In fact, he could have, should have, and potentially would have on another day.
Well, I mean, this was his most prolific season when he did return.
Yes.
This was his best season when he did return. And in 13 minutes, he opens the scoring. He developed a great partnership with Tommy Coyne. Tommy Coyne, who was another, for me, one of my favourite ever Celtic players was Tommy Coyne. Very harshly treated by the club. I've always liked underdog. Like Brian McClare was my favourite over Mo Johnson. Then Tommy Coyne was my favourite over Charlie Nicholas. I've always been a contrarian. I've always just went against the grain, as you'll probably find, as you know by now, who'll be sitting doing this rubbish with me. So Coyne to Nicholas, and Nicholas finishes it well. It's a slide underneath the goalkeeper. And what I liked about this goal and what I liked about this, and I want these to return to Celtic Park, is the green nets. We have to start a campaign to get the green nets back at Celtic Park.
People think we rehearse all this, Kev, right? And we don't, right? It's a fact, we don't. I was going to say green and white nets, not green nets. But do you remember, I think the 90s, it was like green and white for a season. It was sort of in blocks. And I was thinking when I was watching the highlights today, and I watched them twice, I was like, the green nets, it's maybe a bit bold, but they could do with bringing back the green and white ones. Just something to separate yourself from the rest again, Kev. But that is so funny you picked up on that. Genuinely, we do not discuss these aspects.
No, we don't.
But I promise you that was an observation I made. I went, we should bring back coloured nets. My opinion was not all green. I'd go green and white.
No, I liked all green because see, like I was thinking about this. The Celtic board like to rinse the Celtic fans, eh? So if they had an all green net, they could get a sponsor's name in the net and maybe save us charging the fans a bit of money. Like get Daffabet or something in the net or something like that. Daffanet. There you go. If Don Mackay's watching, we're copywriting that Daffanet. Yeah. If anybody, we're copywriting that, and we want some of the Spondulics if he's actually go ahead and actually do that. That was Charlie Nicholas's 99th goal for Celtic.
Yes.
And again, this blew my mind. This absolutely blew my mind. That was his 99th goal for Celtic. Again, why? I just must have a memory blank of him being that prolific in his setting point. Obviously, it goes with his first point, his first time and his second time goal, total goals. But again, I'm going, he was our main man. He was our main man up front at this point. And again, I'm just thinking about it. Again, I'm going, the jungle loving him and all of that. And I'm going, I just do not remember that being the case at that time. I do not remember Liam Brady having such a joyful occasion at Celtic Park at that time. Because the Jungle's in great voice. Rangers had just been put out of Europe. The Jungle's singing about no Huns in Europe, and like they're singing for Tony Cascarino, they're singing for Liam Brady, they're singing for Charlie Nicholas, they're singing for Mike Galloway. The feel-good factor was there.
100%, Kim. I agree with you massively on that. See, interestingly about Charlie Nicholas as well. When do you think, think about how many goals he scored that season? Over 30, you've said today.
Over 30. It's either 25 or 30. I can't remember.
Let's say it was over 30. When was the last time Celtic would have had a striker scoring over 30 goals and not winning the league? You'd be going back over a decade, 15, maybe even 20 years, to a Henrik season where we maybe lost it in the last day. If you've got a guy in there scoring over 30 goals, you do not expect to finish the SPFL season or the SPL, whatever it was called back then, third. which is what happened.
Which
I find
ended
that
up.
fascinating to have a striker in such prolific form over a 44-game season, over 30 goals, and we actually finished third this season.
We did, and you got me thinking there, eh? When we signed Tommy Coyne from Dundee, or the 87-88 season,
yep.
when Tommy Coyne played for Dundee, Tommy Coyne scored 30 goals for Dundee in the Scottish Premier League that season.
Wow. Wow. See, my memories of Tommy Coyne, again, because I'm slightly behind, would be a Motherwell striker. So I always find it funny when I see him in the hoops. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's always one of those ones that's just removed from what my initial memories are. If you mentioned Tommy Coyne to me, I think of the Motherwell striker, eh?
I mean, Red Scotland, if Tommy Coyne had pace, he would have been in a Barcelona top. What a footballer he was as slow as a week in the jail, though. Maybe that's why he didn't end up at Barcelona Red. But he was decent for us. I think he was harshly done by. He went to Motherwell and he done really well for Motherwell. He scored a couple of goals against Celtic when he went to Motherwell. He ended up going to the 1994 World Cup to play for the Republic of Ireland. Did Tommy Coyne. So,
absolutely fair.
Again, it was one of those decisions to get rid of him, which baffles now. It really does baffle now. I can't remember how it was at the time.
Right. I was going to ask you why you thought he was harshly treated.
I think he was harshly treated because change of managers tried to bring in their own players. I mean, obviously Cascarino was signed, so Liam Brady's trying to bring in Cascarino at that point, eh? And when he eventually left, Coyne was always a better option than Cascarino. And I think Brady's reluctance to play him, trying to prove that Cascarino was going to be a success.
Gotcha.
But then I think that's what it was, really. Then when you move on, we ended up signing, I can't remember if he was still here or no, but we ended up signing guys like Andy Payton and that. So Cascarino was never really a favourite. I mean, what you've got to remember, we've got 3 goal scorers this day, and all 3 of them were available for transfer that summer. All 3 of them were on the transfer list. Tommy Coyne, Charlie Nicholas and Mike Galloway were on the transfer list that summer. And by the time you get to October, they're mainstays of the team. Absolutely.
I find it fascinating that about Charlie Nicholas, because obviously he'd had a decent spell at Aberdeen before he came back to Celtic, hadn't he?
He did.
And I also find, when I look back through players' careers again, not trying to enthuse about how young I am, because I am in my 30s now, but I always find it fascinating Charlie Nicholas left Arsenal to go to Aberdeen. And you think, is that because Aberdeen's reputation was still slightly maybe above what it would be now, for example, because of the success under Ferguson, and it was a club of more repute that he was joining then? Or was it his career had regressed so much he had to start again from building blocks, you know what I mean? And start Aberdeen and sort of to rebuild and sort of reinvent himself. You'll know better than me on this, Kev. This is why I find this fascinating.
Truthfully, I can't actually remember. I think George Graham had just took over as Arsenal manager, and Nicholas was never going to suit a George Graham Arsenal.
Yes.
And at that time, I mean, he married a girl from Stirling, so I think he just wanted to come back up the road. And what you've got to remember at that time, Russell, was the gates were shared. So Aberdeen could pay a fair whack of wages, even though they were like smaller attendances. So of the 28,845 was at Celtic Park that day, Aberdeen got half that money.
Gotcha. That makes sense, because
so Dundee United and Aberdeen could challenge because they were getting money for 2 trips to Celtic Park and
the other place.
The other place.
I know, I get you. Because I wanted to touch on this as well, Kev. Again, I love being the outsider on these sort of ones where we go further back in time, because I know you were highly active as a Celtic supporter in this era. Mike Galloway, it comes up, as we were talking about earlier, the graphics on Scott Sport, 500,000 signed from Hearts in 1989. Now, that was 32 years ago, Kev. Today, we just seen Hibs turn down, or yesterday, a 500 grand bid for one of their best players from Aberdeen, Martin Boyle. How come there has been no sort of, do you know what I mean? Like inflation at the rate of knots you would expect, just like even a steady inflation in Scottish transfer fees. 32 years is a long time in football. Now, my guess would be that 500,000 in 89 would be English Premier League sort of money getting bandied about between certain clubs. Maybe not top end, but certainly a figure getting bandied about English Premier League clubs. Yet now, we're still talking about £500,000 for one of the Edinburgh club's best players. I find that fascinating.
That's fascinating, but you look at the players that Rangers signed at that time. The two Everton guys, Gary Stevens and Trevor Stevens, and I think they got both of them for just over £2 million. Two quality players, and the differences between the transfer fees between England and Scotland weren't that much. What you're talking about, Scottish teams paying that type of money. We paid £750,000 for Stuart Slater from West Ham, a Premiership player in the West Ham.
Yes.
First team player in West Ham. Around about the same time, Falkirk paid £500,000 for Kevin McAllister, who was playing in the first team at Chelsea at that time. So Scottish football had money. David Lowe always says round about this time when you had the Souness revolution, and I'm doing the air quotes because it was the revolution that ended up killing the Scottish game. That was when clubs started borrowing from banks. So round about that time, you would have clubs who were willing to spend that kind of money on the safe in the knowledge that they would probably get that sort of money from their 2 visits to Celtic Park on their 2 visits to Ibrox.
Because of the half 50-50.
Because of the 50-50 split.
Sure.
And I mean, 1992, Brian Conway comes in. This is where I was going. The EPL came into being. 1992 is year zero. Sky money pours into England. The transfer fees rocket. And the Scottish clubs, particularly Celtic and Rangers, go, why are we giving Aberdeen 50% of our gate receipts?
Yeah.
And competition in Scottish football completely disappeared at that point. And if you ever want Scottish football to be competitive again, that's got to come back in. That has got to come back in. That there's got to be a better distribution of wealth in the Scottish game. Everybody moans about how could Dundee United compete in the 80s, and I mean, this was a decent Dundee United side, and Aberdeen could compete. That was because the financial disparity wasn't as great as what it is now. But when the English Premier League came into being in 1992, that completely killed the Scottish game because it then became a total business.
Yeah, which I totally take on board, Kim. But what I would say is when Rangers were signing players for £2 million, that you're talking about from Everton, they're still signing guys for, like Barisic, for example, was £2 million not so long ago. It just seems really mad that the money's not moved on. It's almost like it's frozen in time. The transfer fees in Scotland, I always remember, I think I've said this on Screamacelica before, Liam Boyce, good surname, was sold by Ross County to Burton Albion. Top scorer, he scored more than Moussa Dembele in the SPFL, sold for 500 grand. And you're going, well, Burton Albion aren't part of the Scottish football's woes, right? They're part of the English machine that we've just referred to. Yet we're still taking this sort of pennies, realistically, as if transfer fees or inflation of fees have completely frozen in time. But, 500 grand for the top scorer of your Premier Division doesn't add up.
But then that's a lot of money to Ross County, and Burton Albion know this.
That's small-mindedness, okay?
It maybe is, but that's up to the chairman.
I know.
Jim Hannaway is talking about the split gates. It's also why we had 65,000, 85,000 in for a league title winning match v Dundee in the old Celtic Park and declared 43,000, I think it was. That is true. That is ultimately true. Look, we're in the big bad business world now, and there's no way that you'll get Don Mackay going, aye, I'll give Motherwell 50% of 60,000. I'll give that, that's fine, and it's the same way you wouldn't get Motherwell going, I'll give Celtic 50% of 6,500. So it's like swings and roundabouts, but that was the reason that Scottish football was a lot closer. You say Celtic finished third that season, and I think Aberdeen took it to the last day to go to Ibrox, would it be? Or was that the following season? I think Aberdeen...
We finished below Hearts by a point.
All right, so Hearts, that must have been the following season that Hearts took...
We finished below Hearts by a point.
That's the reason that Aberdeen that season took it to the last day and stuff like that, because there wasn't that big a financial disparity. And look, we were only getting 28,000, allegedly. We're only getting 28,000 at that point. Aberdeen were probably getting 16,000, 17,000. So the disparity is not there. The season ticket sales are not there. The game, if we get back to it, Paul McStay was just doing Paul McStay things again, A guy playing his first game in that season, man. He was just doing Paul McStay things.
Every time I watch him now, it's getting better and better. This show has been great for me for looking back over, old Celtic matches and sort of appreciating. See, rather than looking at it through a lens of, oh, that was old football, I watch, new football, which I think is a snobbery that we're all entitled to with age. The younger you are, the more snobby you are to football that was before your time. But see, when you can watch it, you need to do your research. Paul McStay at one point does a tackle that's a back heel. I don't know if you remember that, the highlights. And all Jerry McNee says, what is that? Good work from McStay. I'm like, he literally just did a tackle and he makes it turns out a big drag back heel. It's outstanding. There's also a moment where we nearly scored in the first half, outside of the boot pass by McStay, right across the back line. And it was not too dissimilar to Kyogo's from the other day.
I've wrote that down as well.
That's good. See, you're hanging about me too much now, Kev.
I know. I wrote that down as well.
It's a masterclass from the highlight.
It's McStay's phenomenal again. And the Mike Galloway interview, it's interesting that Mikey obviously says that Paul is the best player that he's ever played with, and he could have played anywhere in the world for any team in the world. He was that good. And when you start watching these, especially the extended highlights, you actually get how totally all-round the midfielder he was. Ewan Boy Martin comes in and he says, back in the day, most Scottish clubs used their own players brought through the youth system. That's why it was a more competitive league. I think Scotland probably produced better players at that point. And when you see guys like McStay, who was phenomenal, and you just have to have a look at that Celtic team, who came through our youth system, Bonner, McNally, White, O'Neill, McStay, Nicholas, all came through our youth system, like at that time, and that's a true point as well. And I like the fact that teams seem to go are going back to that. I really do think that teams are going back to it, and I enjoy that. I really do enjoy that.
I think it's a refreshing thing, Kev, and I think it gives clubs an identity as well. It gives it a wee bit of soul when you see that there's fruits of the club's labour. You know what I mean? Like, this is why you have now an academy in place. If ever we've got more tools now than ever to be able to produce 3 or 4 youth team players, and yet more often than not we don't. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I find that quite strange, because you look back to these eras, and albeit I suppose you could argue, was it a successful era? No, so it didn't work. But what we've done is reinvest in that area of the club massively. The academy now has been so well sort of financed, funded, I don't think Celtic has really an excuse. Do you know what I mean? To not have more than, you know, one or two, if you're lucky, in your squad of 18. I just find that a wee bit.
You sounded a bit Celtic there. I thought you were going to come out there. If the Lions trained at Barrafield on that pitch, it was good enough for the youngsters of the day. Oh, they're too pampered. I thought you were actually going that route as well. Ian McIntosh, I do get what you're saying. I don't think Celtic have got value from their youth academy since it's went residential, really. I think Kieran Tierney is the only success that's came through since they've built the residential stuff. But then we've had so many players leave to Bayern Munich, Man City, all over the shop. Are we ever going to know if it would have been a success or not? But that's Celtic's problem, and we need to show them a pathway into the first team to allow them to develop. Sure. We had a great conversation on the WhatsApp group about the team in the Lowland League just now, whether that's going to be beneficial for the players that are there after winning 10-0 at the weekend. There's probably players all there, but as we spoke about Leo Helge last week, who looks like he's going to go to Leeds United. He had 10 games for Ross County last season. Is he going to want to go down and play Vela Leven? He's already proved that he's above that level.
No,
so that's something Celtic have got to sort out. Also, at this time, you've got a reserve league. You've got a man's league where young boys are up against hardened professionals coming back from injury, and it was a competitive league. Ian McIntosh gives you another flavour of the 80s, what I was speaking about earlier on as well. Got lifted over the turnstiles in the jungle in the late 80s. We'd just hang around and ask any adult there, happy days. Can you give us a lift hour, mister? I mean, imagine, you wouldn't get away with that now. You wouldn't get away with that now. Like, it's just when a much simpler time. It really was a much simpler time. Barca boy comes in. Oko Fletch scores a hat-trick for West Ham under 23s. That's another one that didn't really get a chance at Celtic, but we move on in the 43rd minute of this game. And Charlie Nicholas scores his 100th goal for Celtic.
Yes.
And it's a great move. Collins gets the ball just in front of the main stand, which is the only part of the stadium that hasn't changed for 30 years ago when you actually look at it now. I mean, this game was like nearly 30 years ago, 29 years ago.
Yeah.
This game, and the main stand hasn't changed apart from it's now all green seats. Yeah. So Collins gets the ball, he crosses it in. What a header by Tommy Coyne! A great header by Tommy Coyne into the path of Charlie Nicholas, and Charlie slams home his 100th goal for Celtic.
Superb from Nicholas to get such a milestone. It's not these aren't milestones that are few and far between, Kev. These are special accolades when you're part of the 100 club. You'll need to listen to quotes by John Hartson, for example, when he considers himself part of it and the pride that he takes in being part of that 100 club. I also think as well, you need to talk about Collins a wee bit then. He's so young, yet looks the exact same, which is weird. I don't know what moisturiser he's using, but they could definitely sponsor Screamacelica if they want, because that is how to stay looking young, whatever it was he's wearing. But he does a couple of step overs at the touchline. I don't know if it was right before the goal or it was later on. And you look at him and you go, this guy could play. And the more you're watching him and McStay, the more confused I'm getting as to what happened to these teams. You know what I mean? Because you're raving about Tommy Coyne. We're looking at a guy who just scored his 100th goal for Celtic. I'm looking at 25-year-old McStay, 22, 23-year-old, 23 Collins would have been. He was born 1968, January. 23-year-old Collins, and you're going, look at the ability here. This is a team. Gary Gillespie, correct me if I'm wrong, was he not signed from Liverpool?
Right.
Mark Galloway's a £500,000 buy from a fellow SPL side at this point. You're going, and the actual highlights themselves, I encourage anyone to watch them, because the standard of football is fantastic. It's funny because The post-match, Jerry McNeid obviously does it. He's done the commentary during the game, and then he does a sort of sit-down interview with a very young-looking Jim White. And McNeid actually says, this is far removed, though, from the Celtic we've seen host St Mirren 2 weeks ago. He goes, if they can play like that today, they're in a title race. They're only 4 points behind. However, what we've seen 2 weeks ago was the complete opposite.
I think at that time, the team wasn't consistent enough and the Scottish League was stronger.
Good point.
The Scottish League was stronger. The team wasn't consistent enough. And I think Liam didn't settle in as... By the time you got to a certain point in Scottish football, you couldn't play football like that. And you have to have a bit of dig. And we couldn't adapt. Rangers, even though... I mean, it's quite interesting you're talking about Jim White and Jerry McNeid after it. They talk about they've just sold Trevor Stephen to Marseille. Bizarrely, I mean, they're selling a guy. They've lost Peter Hoostra, and they name a couple other players that they've lost. Rangers just had a strength and depth that Celtic couldn't have. And Celtic, that was probably the main problem. Celtic didn't have the strength and depth. And you had guys like Slater, Cascarino, Gillespie who failed, and Celtic couldn't have players that were first-team players signed for a lot of money for a club who didn't have any credit whatsoever with the bank. We needed the guys to work, and they didn't work. And I think that's the main problem. On our day, when you actually see games like this, we were great to watch, but these days were few and far between. I mean, I think what nails it perfectly is post-match Jerry McNeid goes, the European game has been great for Celtic, and now they've got an easy draw in the next round to get through, a very favourable draw. Who did we draw? Neuchâtel Xamax, who actually hammered us 5-1. And I think that shows you inconsistency, really, with Celtic at that point. We go in at half-time, Peter Grant comes on for Gary Gillespie, who injured himself probably walking up the tunnel. Another problem with Mr. Gillespie. And we score a minute into the second half. Again, another whirlwind start. Derek White charges up the pitch like a precursor to Christopher Ayer charging up the pitch. He tries to play a 1-2 with Charlie Nicholas. Nicholas dummies it, manages to get it at the second attempt. He hits Guido van der Kamp with the ball. Nicholas then has the shot. It hits inside of the post, bounces out, and Tommy Coyne scores. He taps in the rebound. After this goal, this leads to Celtic playing some great football, even better football than what they played in the first half. And it's Tony Haggerty would say free-flowing, free-flowing Celtic. It is unbelievable the amount of chances that we actually have. Collins has a chance. Coyne has a chance. Nicholas has a chance for his hat-trick. This game could have actually been 7, 8 or 9.
Now, does that sound familiar, Kevin?
It does sound very, very familiar. And
what does it sound familiar to?
Well, if we're talking about Jerry McNeid saying that he'd watched a Celtic team 2 weeks ago against St Mirren and no play very well. And we're talking about a Celtic team who 15 days before had struggled to beat Hearts at Tynecastle and then completely wiped the floor with them 15 days later. And you're talking about Liam Brady, who had a way to play football, and you're talking about Ange Postecoglou, who's got a way to play football. And now we're not saying there's going to be any comparison between the two of them because, as we says at the start of this, do not take us seriously. But it was very difficult not to have that wee notion in your head when you were watching this and they were talking about a dodgy start to the season and now they've turned the corner with a team that's extremely talented. It was difficult for me not to have a wee wry smile and go, this seems extremely familiar.
It does a wee bit, doesn't it? I just hope that, you know, any of those mistakes that were maybe made then where we had games that we still, albeit remember, you know, you get accused of negativity a lot in this show, Kev. You know, not maybe Screamacelica, but in the bulletins. We did win 4-1 after all. However, you can't help but think if it's a season that we finished third, was perhaps a lack of clinicalness and maybe an over-reliance on Charlie Nicholas's goals, looking at the stats, perhaps a contributor to the fact that we did actually finish that season third. Now, whilst I certainly don't think the current Celtic team will finish, third by any stretch, you cannot deny that there has to be lessons learned from the past, even as back as 30 years, 31 years, however long it is, that we go, do you know what? Even when you're at your rip-roaring, free-flowing best, can you do that week in, week out? Can you keep that consistency up? And if you can you afford to miss the chances that we perhaps did this match? It is interesting to see both sides of it. But like you very much, watching the highlights back, you couldn't help but think, that Celtic team was brilliant. And then it's Liam Brady in charge when you're going, but that doesn't add up. It doesn't stacked up. Do you know what I mean? Because that era it all gets condensed into one bracket, doesn't it? It's just all incredible time.
It does. It was good to actually go back and actually realise that Brady had a purple period, which was basically when Mikey Galloway was man of the match most weeks, and Mikey scores the fourth goal of this game, and it's one of the greatest goals you'll ever see at Celtic Park. It's probably the best goal ever scored into a green net at Celtic Park. I think I can safely say that, actually.
I think Paul Lambert watches that and goes, "I'll raise you the January Old Firm match." Because I think Galloway's is better. I'm not lying to you, I genuinely do. But you think they're quite similar sort of goals. I thought the exact same swerve, exact same corner of the net.
Basically, what happens is McStay's got the ball in front of the jungle. He plays it to John Collins, and John Collins lays the ball to a marauding Mike Galloway, who takes one touch, is about 35 yards from goal, and whaps this thing straight into the top corner. Guido van der Kamp had a cheek to actually die for this. And it is one of the best goals that you'll see at Celtic Park. It's an actual peaky goal. There's a YouTube video. It's called Mike Galloway's Celtic Goals. Go and watch them all. Every one of them's a peach. Every one of them is a fair strike from at least 30, between 20 and 30 yards. It is a crap. But this goal is absolutely fantastic. And I think it summed up the confidence of Mikey at this point, playing for that Celtic team.
He's in a purple patch, Kevin. I don't think there's two ways about that. He is definitely riding on the crest of a wave of confidence, as you absolutely say. And that then gets reflected when people play with confidence. They attempt things that perhaps they wouldn't normally when they play within themselves. And I've just been thinking while you were talking of centre-backs scoring similar goals, right? So Paul Lambert is maybe a rubbish example. We'll put that one at one side. What about Vincent Kompany from Man City against Leicester a couple of years ago that I think it won them the league?
Peach. That was a peach goal, eh?
A centre-half strolling up like that. No right to be there whatsoever, and certainly no right to be hitting one through the laces, and it just swerves so perfectly in a top corner. A wonder strike. And you know what? Having watched the State of Mind interview with Paul and Mike Galloway, which is brilliantly produced, really enjoyed watching it. I was beaming when I was watching it, Kev, initially. I thought, now I've seen that interview with him, I thought, that guy, I'm glad he had moments like that. You know that, because he's not had the easiest of lives. And he strikes me as just an honest guy who comes clean about any issues he's had, during his personal life as well. And you look at moments like that and you go, well, you watch that replay, Mike, you know what I mean? And hopefully that puts a smile on your face, because that is a goal to be proud of at a moment in time, clearly, where you were on top of the world.
I mean, Jim Hannaway, Mikey Galloway, like the Karate Kid, the way he kicked his volleys. For the younger ones who listen or watch this, at the end of the game, the Celtic support singing for Mike Galloway, and he put it in a kind of context for the younger generation. This was like the video that's kicking about of the Green Brigade singing the Callum McGregor song. This is what it was like. It was full adulation for this guy who was basically a journeyman footballer who had a rapid ascent through. I mean, once he started getting those moves, it never stopped. It was 18 months at each club, and he kept on going bigger and bigger at each club, and he ended up at the club that he supported as a boy.
Yep.
And he absolutely loved it. And us on the terraces related to that, related to the way that he played, related to the fact that he was one of us. And that comes across in the interview, Russell. It comes across that he's a really humble guy, and that he knows he was a Celtic fan who really, really got lucky.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I just want to say again, I mean, when I watched the goal, genuinely, obviously, you know what the scoreline is when you're watching the highlights already. But for that to be, and I knew there was a Mike Galloway tie-in that we were doing this week as well. And yet, still when that goal went in, I was like, yes. Do you know what I mean? It was like I genuinely felt chuffed for the guy. You know what I mean? And that is, a lot of that is to do with the interview that I seen last week on A State of Mind. Because I just felt like that is someone that was living his dream. And he was doing it in a very difficult period in Celtic's history when you look back at it. And he was doing his damn best for a cause that was probably against the odds when you consider the transfers you were just discussing there. The Rangers were making at the time, you know, willy-nilly selling players to Marseille, buying 2 guys for Everton, England internationals, etc. You know, we were up against it then. And Mike Galloway was just a guy living his dream, playing for the team he always wanted to. And it was great to look back and see there was a period there where, whilst it'll get looked back on as a Celtic era that wasn't fantastic, Mike Galloway will know there was a period where I was a pretty good player for Celtic. You know that? I was one of the first picks at one stage. Whether it be the longest period ever or not, it's kind of irrelevant. Imagine having that as a memory to look back on, that at one time I was kind of a key man in a Celtic team.
He was. 2 comments. Kev, is that an Italy World Cup t-shirt? Yes, it is.
I've got one as well, by the way. You should have told me you were wearing that. Not the exact same, but close.
Close. Donny Boy 67, I think, sums up what Mike Galloway gave to Celtic. Bless Mike Galloway, tried his pan out every game in a struggling team. And I think that's what it is. Give me like having a conversation with Mike Galloway rather than having a conversation with some of the players Give me a conversation with Mike Galloway rather than give me a conversation with Stuart Armstrong. Give me a conversation with Mike Galloway, because I would love to hear about Celtic at that time. Maybe I'm just showing my age there. I mean, what you've got to remember is Mike Galloway was paraded the same day as Paul Elliott, another one of my favourite players ever.
Yes.
And Jackie Jakanowski. And do not get me wrong, the fact that Mike Galloway got his move to Celtic was not a surprise. He was Hearts' best player for the 18 months he was there. He was a fantastic player for Hearts. And when we signed him for £500,000, there wasn't a lot of shaking the heads with Celtic fans. No, that we didn't have social media or anything by that point. It was guys that you spoke to going to the games. And they were going, fantastic signing. This is a great signing. This is the bite that we actually need in the middle of the park. But it wasn't until he moved to centre-half, Liam Brady moved him to centre-half, that he became the player that had this purple patch. And what I really enjoyed about the interview was the fact that his nickname was Psycho, and the players called him Psycho.
Love that. Love that as well. Absolutely. And again, I just think it's brilliant that in a team that will be remembered for the names like Paul McStay, John Collins, big names, Charlie Nicholas, Champagne Charlie, these are guys that they're iconic footballers, mate, to me. Growing up, they were names that I knew from a very, very young age. Mike Galloway, not so much. I have to be honest, not so much. And when you watch this sort of thing back and you watch the interview with him, you realise just how big a part the likes of Mike Galloway have played in the history of Glasgow Celtic, or Celtic, whatever you want to call it. Because to me, I think it's brilliant about the unsung heroes, because they've all got a story, don't they? And I think it'll be interesting over the next 10, 20 years we're doing this, Kev, right? and there'll be guys in the era of Brendan Rodgers that we'll bring into conversation that we'll be looking at and going, he was a bit of an unsung hero, him. He went under the radar in that quadruple treble time. And I just think that right now it's brilliant that we've got the ability now to interview these guys, let them recount their glory days in a Celtic jersey, and we've got a platform now where we can watch it, look back, and actually admire some people that maybe didn't get the hero's reception that they deserved at the time.
I think, again, it's the early 90s. Celtic never won nothing. So a lot of people look back, not as fondly, they call it a bad time. And when, as Jim maybe points out, that we maybe meant more to each other than fans and players as one. My dad told me a great story when I told him what Screamacelica was going to be about Mike Galloway attending a Celtic supporters function in the Newmarket Inn in Bannockburn. Right. And Mike Galloway was in the bar, as he says in the interview, he was quite fond of a supporters function, and that got him into some trouble at times where
he did say that.
He would stay 3 or 4 days in the village where he had went to the function, as he was enjoying the company so much. But my dad says he was at the Celtic supporters do, and he was standing at the bar, and somebody was talking away to him. He says, and Mike lifted up his T-shirt, and he had a Celtic tattoo on his back, and he was showing his guy his Celtic tattoo. You wouldn't get who else has got a Celtic tattoo modern day? Donati's the. There was also a rumour that
Celtic crest for his heart.
He did, I think DiCanio's also got a Celtic tattoo, has he not? On underneath the Lazio eagle, I think. I might be wrong. Might be wrong there. And there was also the rumour that Craig Beattie had a Rangers tattoo, but that was never proven if he did or not.
I wouldn't care even if he did.
Aye. Dermot John comes in, and this is something that Mikey mentions as well in the interview. Mikey was in a pub in Dunfermline before the game as he was injured. What a reception that he got. And Galloway talks about this after his car crash, the reception that he's actually had from the Celtic supporters. He's one of our own. And it's interesting now we can look back on this. And I think we look back on this now more favourably because we're not as living in the moment. We can look back and go, by the way, there was a couple of players in that team that weren't as bad as what we actually thought. They get a bad rap, and now everything's finished. And we're 20, 30 years down the line, we can go, look, they done something that me and you have only dreamt of, Russell. They've played for Celtic. And we now look at them more favourably or with more comfortable eyes than what we did at the time, when it was all about winning games of football and all of that. And I'm always wondering if we'll ever get round to Charlie Nicholas again.
I know what you mean. I've raised this before, Kev. See, for me, right, revisionism is our God-given right as a Celtic supporter to have, a football fan to have, because it means trolling back through, you know, whether it's old highlights, whether it's old footage of interviews, whether it's reading about players, and then you're allowed to reinvent your opinion. For me, one of the most relevant examples I can think of recent times is Samaras. Samaras, don't get me wrong, I loved him at the time just purely because he was a maverick. But everyone hated it. He was hated by, not everyone, but he was hated by so many fans, thought he was lazy, lethargic. Within 2 years of him going, he was this European maverick, marvel, that, he dug us out. He was a hero up front, you know, when he was in the mood. And I always thought, a lot of favourable revisionism has went on in George Samaras, because I can remember a lot of frustrated fans over his tenure at Celtic up front, you know, feeling really, sort of, what is the deal with this guy? Is he uninterested? What is it? And I think it just shows you how when you look back at things from a different lens, that's the rightest fans, I think.
As Donny Boy 67 asks if DiCanio's got the Celtic badge under his swastika, maybe. You need to ask Paulo that. We're not going to comment on that. You're right, though, Russell. Samaras was the most frustrating guy when you wanted to win games and that. But now But now you've got a bit of time to actually look back and consider. You go, aye, we were wrong there. We were actually wrong there. We should have enjoyed what we had. And I think this is a point of the fact that we do something where we need instant reaction. We get thousands of folk looking for instant reaction, and we'll maybe say things that go, well, when you actually even think about it, you actually even have 12 hours to think about it. You go, I was a bit harsh there, actually. I'll need to revisit that. But people want that reaction right away. And you, as to take your phrase, sometimes you just double down on it, even though that you know that, by the way, I was a bit over the top there on certain things. It's like, I think we need to enjoy it. I'm sure we're going to be doing this in 10 years' time, talking about Greg Taylor. I had to get that in. I really had to get that in. But that's the thing. We don't enjoy things in front of us. I mean, you look at Sunday, and I listened to you guys on Monday, and you were going, aye, but against better teams, we should have scored 10, should have scored that. Whereas at the time, we would have been in 1991, I would have been at school on the Monday morning going like that. We're going to win the league. We're going to go that. Yes. No, just enjoying the fact is we had a great game on Saturday. It doesn't matter what should have happened, what could have happened, what's going to happen in the future. We should have just enjoyed guys like Mike Galloway at that moment. And I'm really quite glad that the Jungle was enjoying Mike Galloway at that moment, singing his name, giving them that moment, not knowing what was going to happen in the future. And
absolutely agree with that, Kev. I think that's a really good way of putting it as well. He had his moment in the sun, if you like, for Celtic that day especially. You've got all the fans chanting his name. He scores the goal of his dreams, an absolute perler. And the fans, by the way, unless I'm mistaken, were they singing his name before the game as well?
Before the game and after it as well, eh?
Right. So that shows you how influential support can be, Kev. Now, we spoke earlier, there was only 28,000 watching, but yet, by heck did it inspire, because Mike Galloway having his name chanted before the game has the confidence then in the second half. Don't get me wrong, once we've got a clear lead, to hit a shot, even have the audacity to take that on, and look at the conviction when he actually hits it. Utterly superb. And yeah, no, I just think it's a fantastic. It's a random match to look back on, but I think it's one that Mr. Galloway himself will look back on very fondly.
It does, and he does mention that in the interview. If you haven't watched the interview, please go and watch it and leave a comment underneath it. And the comments will get passed back to Mikey, and he's been overwhelmed by the positivity as a Celtic support have shown him. Two things, just to sum up this game. Charlie Nicholas and Mike Galloway both mentioned that the supporters breed the confidence. Mm-hmm. And that is very, very eerily similar as well to what we're actually hearing this season. Eerily similar. That the Celtic fans are extremely special. Like, we all knew it, but last season we actually just went, they're talking rubbish. I think it's about time we maybe revise that and says, hey, we're the reason that they won 4 trebles in a row. Because it's not the players, it's not the tactics, it's us.
I certainly think there's a magic within the Celtic support, Kev, that can elevate players to another level. And I think there's countless examples over the years where you can see players have a potential limit and played above it, because the mitigating factor in that has to be the fans. It's got to be, Kev. It's got to be.
And just as I say about Mike Galloway, giving them that moment of appreciation, us as a support at the moment should just give guys like Ralston, Taylor, Turnbull that moment of appreciation as well, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And
this could be Ralston's Mike Galloway.
It could well be. It could be 6, 7, 10 games that we'll look back on and going, you made a decent contribution to Postecoglou's start. And we need to just appreciate that, because we do not know what's going to happen in the future. We didn't care what's going to happen in the next 30 seconds, Russell. When my pen could fall down, my microphone could blow up, anything could actually happen. Eh? So as a support, I think looking back and what Mike's story, and the fact is they were praising Mike Galloway, we need to praise the Celtic team no matter what happens. I think we can learn a lesson from this game 30 years ago.
I think it's a brilliant point, Kevin. Again, what you're saying right now is you're looking at players maybe that we didn't really carry, let's be honest, this season, much hope for that back four that we've currently, that are doing a turn for us. And I think maybe it's time to go, well, if you were convinced they wouldn't do well, surely you've got to then flip that and give them the same appreciation for the fact that they are. You know what I mean? And I think you're absolutely right. I think for guys like Ralston, for example, this might be it. It might be that we look back on Screamacelica in 5 years' time and go, remember the 3 months when Ralston was like Cafu? You know what I mean? And we'll have a joke about that and go, remember the days he went on and then obviously he fell back at the team. But that could be the conversation we're having.
It could well be.
Whilst, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying that with any hope intended. I sincerely wish him all the best and good on the job that he's done against the odds. But I just think right now, whilst he's inside, let's give him the back, innit? You're absolutely right, Deb. Why do we need to revise it in 5 years and give him it? Why not right now go, Anthony Ralston, you're my favourite right back at Celtic. You might be the only right back. But what sounds better? You're my favourite right back.
No ifs, buts, or excuses.
Yes.
Just praise the lad. I'm doing the game tomorrow night, so I'm probably sure to slag a few players and not take my own advice. 777 Kahashi, liked your pictures modelling the new ACSOM top, Russell.
Yes, mate.
What I have to say, I wasn't available. I was doing the new Ann Summers range that day, so Russell was.
I was a standing.
Russell was a late substitute. Let's move on to music, Russell. So 1991, I didn't even look at the charts. Hingway, you're going to talk about REM.
Yes.
Fire it on.
Because for me, Out of Time is an album that has songs on it that I just think there's something about REM. When they have good songs, they seem to carry a weight of importance, right? And Losing My Religion, to me, is a song I class as much as I think it's a good song, Kev, I find it important, and I don't know why. I don't know why that word springs to mind, REM. But I find when they've got a good song like that, it's important. Something about that song is a message that is deeper in that song that, I don't know, resonates with me, even though I don't know what the message is. But Losing My Religion, for example, on that album is absolutely outstanding track. And of course, you then get to the middle of the album. I'm listening to it, and there's a song sang by Mike Mills. Can't even do it. 2 seconds. Near Wild Heaven. And it's a completely different vocal. And it's Mike Mills. And I actually really like his vocal as well. I think it's really good. He's the bass player. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. And it sounds by this point, you've had Low on by now, and you're going, this is quite a serious album. Do you know what I mean? This is like, boom. There's the girl for is it the B45s? Is that what they were called?
The B52s, mate.
B45. Edit that out, Paul. The B52s. The girl from that jumps in and does Shiny Happy People with them, which is just like cut from a completely different cloth than the opening tracks that you've heard to this album, and shows REM in a completely different light. And it's whatever you need to put in a good mood. That is a song that it just gets you there, mate. Shiny Happy People. And I also find, I watched REM at Tina Park years and years later. I remember they played Stirling Castle. I wonder if, I was going to ask you if you were at that. But
I wasn't at the gig, but I did see it.
At that.
But I did see it because I stood on the Gowney Hill and looked in. So I saw it for nothing. Also saw Ocean Colour Scene standing on the same hill.
So, by the Cannons.
But by the Cannons, yes.
Brilliant. But I mean, REM is quite funny because his whole persona as his career developed it changed, didn't it? He sort of grew into the more sort of, I don't know how you would call it, camp. Like the makeup thing seemed to become more and more like exaggerated on his appearance as he got older, which normally it's the other way out. It sort of phases out as they get older. But as he started, I remember at Tina Park had like a sort of band of like face paint covered in glitter all around his eyes, and he looked more androgynous than what he did. Maybe when they were at the peak of their powers. I always find that quite an interesting sort of career change or change of direction.
What I remember most about this album at this time with REM was, for me, this is their break. This is their Over the Barricades album, where all of a sudden become massively popular. Whereas before they were a sort of cult band who would sell out the Barrowlands and the Edinburgh Playhouse and stuff like that. The next thing you know, they're playing Stirling Castle, they're headlining festivals, everybody at school's talking about losing my religion, shiny happy people and stuff like that. So this was like their breakout album for me. I could be completely wrong there when I'm saying that, but I can only go with my own memories with that. Yeah, and I can remember this. I mean, I remember getting sent to buy the album before Out of Time, which I think was green, from Our Price in Stirling for my cousin's birthday.
Right, okay.
And I think that was 89, 88, 89, that would have been. So I can remember that. So I knew who REM were. Didn't care what they sounded like.
Yeah.
But then by the time you get to 91 and Shiny Happy People goes boom, Losing My Religion goes boom, you go, wow, they're one of the biggest bands in the world by this point.
In the world by then, Kev. That's the thing. Absolutely.
By this point, Wally comes in. 91 was a good year for music. Bryan Adams was at #1 for Donkeys. I think he's been facetious there. And sadly, Freddie Mercury passed away that year too. Freddie Mercury, a big hero of yours?
Oh, Freddie is the man, mate. He is the absolute man. Well, I'll talk at length about him on one of the shows. I promise you, it'll be funny. But yeah, I got a Twitter mention about Bryan Adams saying that we had to give it a shout out. So we better do it. Bryan Adams, like it was, how many weeks was it? #1, 21 weeks in 1991.
I was
something crazy like that, but it was mad because Wet, Wet, Wet. I think 4 years later, was it 3 years later, where Love Is Orange pulled their own single. When it was they were like, that song, of course, that's still selling a rate of knots that could out like easily, if it keeps going like this, we'll break Bryan Adams' record. And Wet, Wet, Wet went, we're sick of the sound of it, and they pulled it. Bryan Adams is still, I think, the longest ever single at #1.
I didn't care. I remember Wet, Wet, Wet pulling it, but it was a cover version. So I wonder how
all around. Yep.
I wonder how the Trogs felt when the royalty checks all of a sudden stopped at the fact that they'd pulled that
single.
B-52's Love Shack, another great throwaway pop song, man. When I say throwaway, I actually do mean it as a compliment. I don't mean it's. I didn't mean it in a bad way. Wally comes back in. Love REM. I was at Stirling Castle, Russell.
Yes, Wally, mate. Brilliant.
Joe Porter. Monster is a brilliant album. That was after Automatic for the People. Archduke, that's disappeared. Where's that? Strange Love the Doctor. Radio Free Europe. Fantastic REM song as well. Archduke actually says the exact same thing as well. There he's it.
There you go.
That was the one I was looking for there. REM, one of the biggest bands in the world, but they're one of the biggest selling band in 1991. That comes to the other band, if they can be called a band, that we're going to speak about, which is the KLF, or the Copyright Liberation Front. That's what the KLF stands for. Now, I love the KLF as a concept, and I've grew to love them over the years because at this time I'm 15, and
sure,
they're a bit of a novelty act because of the Tammy Wynette stuff and all of that. But when you go back and listen to what they actually done, yes, they were there to take the utter mickey out of the music business, but the music that they actually made, for me anyway, was utterly superb when you actually go back and listen to it. Now, You listened to the White Album for the first time today. The White Room, not the White Album. The White Room for the first time today. White Room came out in March 1991. What was your thoughts on the Stadium House, which was the genre they invented for their sound?
You know, What Time Is Love is a song on my Spotify playlist, Kev, right? So I do love that track. After that, I got lost, mate. It just doesn't. I don't get it. Not for me. No offense to the KLF or anyone that is a fan of that music. But me and my flatmate had it on, and I think we got to like track 6 or 7, and he went, "What are you going to say about this?" And I was like, "I don't know, man." I was like, "I'm out my depth of this, man." I was like, "I've not even got a chorus I could speak about or nothing." There's no lyrics, really. There's some awful, I don't even know if you would call it rapping. There's some good vocals, but they're just singing about KLF. It's nonsense. It's just not for me, man.
That's
no offense.
That's the whole point of it. It was meant to be utter nonsense. And what you've got to remember, Bill Drummond and Jimmy Cauty, who were the KLF, basically formed a band called the Jams, the Justified and Ancients of Moo Moo, because they had both been burnt by the music industry. They hated the music industry, but it was all that they knew. So they decided to form a band which would prove how absurd the music industry actually was.
Yeah.
And they were... So they formed the Jams, and basically the first thing that they done was they sampled the Beatles and they sampled ABBA. So at this point, sampling was becoming a thing, but people were sampling like obscure breakbeats for James Brown records, for old disco records. But they just decided, Copyright Liberation Front, they were going to sample the Beatles, All You Need Is Love, and ABBA's Dancing Queen, and mash it together. And it sold, John Peel played it, and it sold quite a lot of copies until ABBA's copyright team got on it and says, you need to pull every copy of that because we're no licensing the sample of Dancing Queen. So the first time I was aware of Bill Drummond and Jimmy Cauty is when they appeared on the front cover of the Melody Maker, driving in a Ford Time Lord to Sweden to meet ABBA, to try and get ABBA to sign this contract to allow them to use Dancing Queen. They never got anywhere near ABBA. It was all a publicity stunt for the interview. So what they done when they're driving on the way back, they realised that they had 20,000 copies of the record in the back of this Ford Time Lord. So what they done was, somewhere in France, they took all the records out and set fire to them because they were useless. They couldn't sell them. I think they kept one and it sold 20 years later for quite a bit of money. Eh? Yes. So it was a massive publicity stunt, but it just proved that art could be thrown away, and it could be made. Something as cheap as trashy. No, we'll burn all these. We'll burn 19,999 records and keep one. And it's the only one that exists. So they done that, then they blew all their money. So they came up with this thing called the Time Lords. And it was a song called Doctor and the TARDIS, which was basically the Doctor Who theme tune mixed with the Gary Glitter Band. Went to #1. They wrote a book about it called How to Make a #1 Record.
That's right. I knew about that.
And it's a Bible, how to make a #1 record. They made £500,000. And they decided they were getting into acid house and rave. And they decided to make a road movie called The White Room. And make a trance album of this road movie. Now the road movie is on YouTube. They never finished it. They blew the £500,000 and it was rubbish, absolute rubbish. But they had these songs, which was a trance album. Eventually, what they had done, they found out that What Time Is Love, the trance version, was a massive, massive hit in the dance floors all over Europe.
Yep.
DJs were playing it. And so they says, well, by the way, we can make some money here. So what we'll do, we'll remix all the songs that is on the soundtrack of this album, which becomes the White Room album.
Yes.
And what they done was they ramped everything up to 10, basically made it overblown, absolutely ridiculous, getting Tammy Wynette on songs, making it loud and that, and says, we'll show you that we can be a success again. And they done it. They became the biggest selling act in 1991, basically using songs that are on this trance album and making the blueprint for the EDMA stuff that happens now. I mean, if you listen to What Time Is Love, 3 AM Eternal and stuff like that, the rapping, the girls singing, they were musical magpies. They had stole all of this for like Chicago house records, but they'd done it on such a scale that Daft Punk, Avicii used everything that's on the White Album as a template going forward. So for something that they were taking the mickey trying to do, they actually were that good at it that they basically made, for me, what is a classic album. It is a classic album, but when Bill Drummond does the Scottish spoken word bit in the middle of it, that is just taking the mickey. That is just like completely taking. It is. They never took themselves serious. I mean, they were on top of the pops, Russell, and I'm into the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses at that time. And these guys are on top of the pops, wearing like horns on their heads, dancing about, and like just utterly taking the mickey of the whole music business. Unfortunately, the music business invited them in, and they made a hell of a lot of money. A hell of a lot of money. And this was against what they stood for. So what they done was they got Tammy Wynette on a song, and basically the video cost £500,000. They had a long boat, they had Vikings, they had the whole shebang. They blew £500,000 on the video. They bought a submarine just because they wanted to spend their royalty money. Then at the Brits, when they were getting voted the best band at the Brits, they basically retired for the music business. And it's announced at the end that KLF have retired for the music business. Yeah. And what Bill Drummond wanted to do, he wanted to cut his hand off with an axe on stage, but he was stopped doing it. He was saying they can't do that. He wanted to
I did not know that.
He wanted to throw sheep's blood into the music executives down the front, but he was stopped to do that. So basically what they'd done, he fired blanks with a big machine gun. It was announced that the KLF had left the music business, and they deleted the whole back catalogue that night. So they could not get any royalties anymore. So they basically, it's a massive cultural zeitgeist moment, which has influenced electronic acts for the 30 years after it. They deleted it.
Why?
You could not get a copy of the White Room for years. That's how when you read the comments under the YouTube, they'll go, oh, thanks for posting this, because you couldn't get a copy of it. And even when now they've went back on the streaming sites, it's a different version completely for what's out there, because that's what they've done. Why did they do it? Who knows? I don't think they've even got an answer themselves why they've done it.
Surely they're missing out on spondoolies, mate. I mean,
I think that was the whole point. I think that was the whole point. I think their whole point was it was that easy to do. They showed how fickle a business music was. That there wasn't in it. They weren't in it for the money. They were in it to make an art statement. So what they done after the Brits was they threw a dead sheep into the after party and drove away in their ice cream van, because they did have an ice cream van.
Oh my
God. So it was like situationist art, I think. For me, I think they wanted to make a point. I really do think they wanted to make a point, and they done it. The thing is, like a lot of things with the KLF, was they were successful, then they blew their money. They blew everything out the water. And even when they deleted everything, what they actually forgot about was they were still earning royalties in Europe. So before they knew it, they had £1 million sitting in their bank account. that they didn't realise that they were going to have. That just shows that they didn't think things through. They just done things on a whim. We'll throw a dead sheep into an after party. I'll cut my hand off with an axe. It's completely like how to make big, massive statements. And so they found £1 million. And they says, what we're going to do with this £1 million. So they nailed it to a board. And they tried to sell it to the Tate Art Gallery for £750,000. They tried to sell it to the Tate Art Gallery.
They tried to sell £1 million for £750,000. Wow, okay.
Right, that just shows you how bizarre their head was working. The Tate Gallery says no, they wouldn't take it. So they then decided what we're going to do with it. So they took a camera crew and took it to Jura and burnt it. They set fire to it and filmed it. That's not the worst thing. Was their original idea was to burn it in Trafalgar Square, was to take it to Trafalgar Square and set fire to it as some ultimate statement, but eventually took it to Jura. Now, have you heard of the Illuminati?
Yes.
Right. So Bill Drummond is heavily influenced by the Illuminati. Or he's not influenced, he believes that they exist, and he believes that all these people are, certain amount of people rule the world. And he's obsessed with the number 23, right? So what they say is they burnt the money, and they says 23 years later, they burnt the money on the 23rd of August 1994. 23 makes a point. The Illuminati believe the 23 is the most powerful number ever because it can only be divided by 1 or it can only be divided by itself. It's the only prime number that can only be divided by itself. And it's only prime number. It's the only prime number that's in order 2 and 3. So the Illuminati seemingly believe that the 23 is the most powerful number, and everything that Bill Drummond's done since and the KLF have done since has always been at 23s. They've released stuff on the 23rd of a month, or it's been 23 years later, right? I'm getting to a point here. I'm not getting to a point for you. So the number 23. Michael Jordan wore the number 23. David Beckham wore the number 23. Ball and Golly wears the number 23. It's all linked. They're all sent to actually prove. They're all sent to prove that Michael Jordan can be an alien sent down to wear the number 23. David Beckham took the number 23 as well. And Ball and Golly was just here to cause chaos. That's why he got the number 23. And Mikael Lustig's just a cool guy. That's why he wore 23 as well. And we've been told, like, the KLF was basically like some sort of cult. That's what they wanted it to actually look like, eh? And the ACSOM team have been called a cult. And let me tell everybody, a wee secret, eh? Paul's favourite number is 23. So we're all part of a big conspiracy. He's not here, so I can actually say this. So there you go. That's my take on the 23 rule. That's my take on the 23 rule. But for me, the KLF were a great art project. And when you look back at what they actually done in utter chaos, was quite good. It was quite. I can understand why you didn't like the White Room, because the White Room is just overblown. Like,
it was hard. Do you know what I mean? I was trying to get involved, and I'm open-minded with music. I'm always up for let's do the album, and if I don't like it, I'll say I don't like it. But by track 5 or 6, genuinely today, I was like, I'm a bit lost here. I wasn't engaging with it. That's the honest truth. And fair play to them. They certainly sound like a bunch of characters. I think probably some of their morals are in the right place. Other ones are maybe just calm down, mate. You know what I mean? That's just a wee bit what's the need. But fair play. If they had an impact on you, Kev, I always have their respect. Oh,
if I ever get this book out and it doesn't sell, I'm going to drive to a field in Sweden and burn it. I'm going to go a field in Cowden beef and set it on fire or something like that. I'm going to make a big gesture at it, just like buy my book or I'll set fire to it in somewhere unusual. I think as well, if you go and watch the Road movie, if you've got 48 minutes to waste, watch the White Room Road movie. It basically makes no sense. They're driving about in this Ford Time Lord police car in the desert where they filmed all the spaghetti westerns in Spain.
Okay.
And they just drive about. And there's a bit when Bill Drummond picks up a big deed eagle and just walks along a railway line with it. And it makes no sense, but I think that was the whole point of it. It wasn't meant to make sense. But Daft Punk copied the whole concept of the White Room soundtrack thing.
Right.
They done it. I can't remember the name of it. I can't remember the name of the video that they filmed, which basically rips off the White Room film. Except they're not driving around in a battered car; they're driving around in a Ferrari.
Right.
But it is completely based on the White Room. And Daft Punk have admitted that the KLF were a massive influence on them just because of what they did. This is where the whole Daft Punk decided to hide their faces. And the reason that the KLF stopped playing live and wore hoods was because they didn't want nobody to know who they were. And that's where Daft Punk got the idea for it. It was to hide their identity. Mm-hmm. So,
that's cool.
There you go. That's my KLF rant, and I've let everybody know about the number 23 conspiracy.
Absolutely.
And stuff like
that.
This
is actually our 23rd Screamacelica as well. No, I'm only kidding. See if it is, we'll need to actually get tinfoil hats on. If it is the 23rd Screamacelica. Right, I think that'll do us for the night, Russell. Nice one, man. Enjoyed that again, Kev.
Thanks to everybody. Please subscribe because we've got the Fratelli's Platinum Disc to give away in the draw this month.
We're going to cover it next week.
We're going to cover Costello music next week. I don't know what game we're going to do. It surrounds it around about that time, but we are going to cover Costello music. So please subscribe to get your name in the draw. And hey, never fight a man with a pair, mate. I'll see you all later.
Cheers.